Our country is in serious trouble, and not just from enemies abroad. Leaders in our government, the media, the academy, and many corporations have trashed the American project of ordered liberty. Instead, in the name of equity, sustainable development, public health, diversity, and inclusion, these powerful groups attack our history, weaponize ethnic resentments, and alienate children from their parents, and even their own bodies, while denying our God-given rights, reason, and reality itself. What if we'd told you 10 years ago that most states and the federal government would soon close schools, churches, and private businesses and force people to stay in their homes for months during a public health crisis, with no evidence that this would do any good? Would you have believed it? Would you have believed the same government would collude with tech companies to silence and cancel anyone, even experts from Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, who criticized the lockdowns? Would you have believed that our government would try to squelch any discussion of the fact that the health crisis was most likely coming from a lab in communist China, or that it had helped fund the research in that same lab? Would you have believed that parents around the country would take their young kids to pornographic drag shows? That teachers would teach young kids they might have been born in the wrong body and tempt them to explore dangerous gender transition drugs and surgery behind their parents' backs? Or that the U.S. Department of Justice would target parents who complained about any of this at school board meetings as domestic terrorists? Would you have believed that rioters would rampage in a dozen U.S. cities, unpunished, night after night, but citizens who resisted them would be charged with murder? That nonviolent protesters who questioned a fishy presidential election would be treated like terrorists? That the FBI would send 24 armed SWAT officers to knock down the door and arrest a father because he pushed a man at a pro-life protest, a man who was attacking his young son? Would you have believed that our nation's law enforcement and intelligence agencies would become so partisan that they would not only defy a sitting president, but cooperate in efforts to remove him from office by falsifying documents and lying under oath? Or that media platforms would delete that president's account during a contested election? Would you have believed the federal government would sit on its collective hands while TikTok, a highly addictive social media platform controlled by the Chinese military, exposed tens of millions of our kids to self-harm, porn, and hatred of their country? An elite betrayal. The people behind all these outrages have rejected America's founding creed for something so alien that it's hard to name. These elites, referring to their status rather than competence, have kicked aside our Constitution, reason, and common sense as obstacles to their power. They seek to erase our history, to start from scratch at year zero, as revolutionaries from 18th century France to 20th century Cambodia tried to do. To expand their power, these same people have demonized our historical figures. We shouldn't think of these figures as pioneers, freedom fighters, and profound thinkers, they insist. We should denounce them as slave owners and racists, religious bigots, or selfish profiteers. As these dark forces advance, the sources of light, those who love God, family, enterprise, reason, and honest public debate, retreat. All sorts of wedding vendors are driven out of business for declining to participate in same-sex weddings. With the passage of the so-called Respect for Marriage Act, our federal government now treats defenders of natural man/woman marriage as bigots. Already, it's easy to be censored, fired, or canceled for refusing to use fake pronouns or otherwise failing to obey the latest dictates of sexual radicals. Even atheist evolutionary biologists are not safe from the woke mobs. Families with a married father and mother could soon be the exception rather than the rule. Not only has our country officially kicked marriage to the curb, but it's now dissolving the legal difference between males and females. Male college athletes like Leah Thomas compete against female athletes. Doctors sterilize children and call it gender-affirming care. A Vermont school decides to drop the words boy and girl and replace them with person who produces sperm and person who produces eggs. All this in the name of gender equity. And then there are the fiscal troubles. The federal government is now approaching $1 trillion a year just on interest payments for its mounting debt. If it keeps spending heaps more than it takes in, the debt alone will drown us.